The ivory lace of her wedding gown felt suffocating now. It had once been a symbol of love, of forever. Now, it was just a cruel reminder of a promise shattered. Lena stood at the altar, her hands trembling as she clutched the bouquet of white roses. The guests whispered, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The priest cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze. But none of it mattered. Because Mark wasn't here. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mix of hope and growing dread battling within her. He was late, that was all. There had to be an explanation. Mark wouldn't just. The doors never opened. Minutes stretched into eternity, and soon, reality set in like a cold, merciless wave. He wasn't coming. The man she had loved, the man she had built her dreams around, had left her standing here, humiliated, abandoned, and broken. And he hadn't even said goodbye. Lena's fingers dug into the delicate silk of her gown as she stood frozen at the altar. The whispers among the guests grew louder, like the rising tide threatening to drown her. "Is this really happening?" someone murmured. "Maybe he got into an accident," another voice suggested. A hand touched her arm, her sister, Mia, her face tight with concern. "Lena," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmurs. Lena turned, her throat tight. "He'll be here," she said, as if saying it out loud would make it true. Something must have happened. Mark wouldn't do this. Mia hesitated before squeezing her hand. "It's been over an hour." An hour. Lena's breath hitched. No. That wasn't possible. Her father, his usually stern face pale with a mixture of worry and anger, stepped forward. "We should leave, sweetheart." Lena shook her head frantically. "No. Not yet." She turned toward the church doors again, willing them to open, willing Mark to burst in, breathless and apologetic, with some ridiculous but forgivable excuse. But the doors remained closed. Tears burned in her eyes. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Mark wasn't the kind of man who would do this to her. He loved her. He said he loved her. Didn't he? The priest cleared his throat. "Miss, we can reschedule if..." No, the word came out sharp, broken. She turned to the guests, friends, family, people who had come to witness the happiest day of her life. Instead, they were witnessing her ruin. She swallowed the lump in her throat and straightened her shoulders, ignoring the way her entire body trembled. "Thank you all for coming," she said, somehow finding her voice. I appreciate it. But I think we're done here." Her mother reached for her, but Lena stepped back. If anyone touched her right now, she'd shatter completely. Mia's eyes darkened with rage. "I swear if I ever see Mark again." Lena inhaled sharply, forcing a smile that felt like a lie. "It doesn't matter. He made his choice. And he hadn't chosen her." 6 months later. The cafe was warm, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and pastries. Lena sat near the window, staring absently at the city outside. 6 months. She had spent 6 months rebuilding herself, stitching together the pieces of a heart that had been left to bleed at the altar. She was fine now. Mostly. The bell above the door chimed. She didn't look up at first, focused on stirring her tea. But then, she felt it. That presence. That unmistakable, heart-stopping presence. Her fingers tightened around her cup. Slowly she looked up. And there he was. Mark. But he wasn't the same man she remembered. His sharp suit was wrinkled, his hair slightly disheveled, but it was his eyes that sent a chill down her spine. Dark. Haunted. Angry. Her stomach twisted. She had imagined this moment so many times, planned all the things she would say if she ever saw him again. But now, faced with him, all those words disappeared. Mark took a step closer, his voice low, rough. "Lena." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "You have no right to say my name." His jaw tightened. "I know you hate me. Do you?" She let out a sharp laugh, though there was nothing funny about this. "You left me at the altar, Mark." Without a word. Without an explanation. So, yeah, hate doesn't even begin to cover it. "I had to leave." Lena scoffed, pushing back her chair. "No, you didn't." You chose to. I was protecting you. His voice was quiet but firm. Something inside her cracked, fury and disbelief colliding all at once. Protecting me? She repeated, her voice shaking. From what? His eyes darkened even more. From myself. Silence stretched between them. Lena clenched her fists, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. That's not an answer. I know, he admitted, but it's all I can give you right now. She exhaled shakily, willing herself to be strong, to not let his presence undo everything she had built in these past months. Then I guess you have your answer, too, she said quietly, because I have nothing to give you either. She turned and walked away, even though every step felt like leaving behind a part of herself. Mark watched as Lena walked away, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had expected this. He had prepared himself for her hatred, her anger. But nothing could have prepared him for the way she looked at him, like he was nothing, like he had never meant a thing to her. And he deserved it. But he wasn't leaving this time. Taking a deep breath, he followed her out of the cafe, his long strides catching up to her just as she reached the street. Lena, wait.
She didn't stop.
Lena. She whirled around so fast he almost collided with her. Don't, she snapped. Don't follow me. Don't say my name like it still means something to you. Mark flinched. It does. Her bitter laugh sliced through him.
No, Mark.
You don't get to say that. Not after what you did. I had my reasons. Her eyes flashed with fury. Reasons? You want to talk about reasons now? After 6 months of silence, she took a step closer, voice shaking. Do you have any idea what it was like? Standing there, waiting for you? Do you know how humiliating it was to have my father, my mother, tell me to go home because my groom had abandoned me? Mark exhaled sharply. I never wanted to hurt you. She shook her head. But you did. And you know what hurts the most? That I don't even know why. No warning, no goodbye. Just nothing. He ran a hand down his face. How could he explain something she could never understand? How could he tell her that leaving had been the only way to keep her safe? I can't tell you everything. Lena let out a hollow laugh. Of course you can't. Because there's always something with you, isn't there? She crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. Tell me, Mark, did you ever plan on coming back? Or did you think I'd be here, waiting for you forever? Mark's jaw tightened. I didn't expect you to wait. She scoffed. Good. Because I didn't. That shouldn't have hurt. But it did. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice softer this time. Please. Lena shook her head. No. You don't need to do anything. You lost the right to talk to me when you walked away. She turned back toward the street, waving for a taxi. Panic surged in his chest. Lena. She turned back one last time, her gaze cold. Don't come looking for me again, Mark. And then she was gone. Mark stood there, fists clenched, heart pounding. She thought this was over. She thought he would let her go. But she was wrong. Because Mark wasn't going to lose her again. Not this time. Lena slammed her apartment door shut and leaned against it, breathing hard. She had expected this moment for months, had rehearsed every possible scenario in her head. She had imagined screaming at him, breaking down in his arms, even slapping him across the face. But nothing had prepared her for the way he looked at her. Like he was still hers. Like he had never stopped loving her. She closed her eyes tightly. It didn't matter. Love meant nothing when trust was already broken. Her phone buzzed.
Mia.
Mia. Did I just see Mark? Please tell me I'm hallucinating. Lena, you're not. Mia. That son of a... Lena sighed and typed back quickly. Lena. I don't want to talk about it. Mia didn't reply, but Lena knew her sister well enough to know that she wouldn't let it go. Not yet. She pushed away from the door, walking into the kitchen and gripping the counter. 6 months. She had spent 6 months convincing herself that she was okay, that she was better off without him. Then why did seeing him hurt just as much as the day he left? A knock on the door snapped her out of her thoughts. Her heart jumped into her throat. No. It couldn't be. Another knock. Lena, came the deep, familiar voice. Her breath caught.
Mark.
Her fingers curled around the counter. Go away. I just want to talk. There's nothing left to say. A long silence.
Then,
I'm not leaving until you hear me out. Lena clenched her jaw.
fine.
If he wanted to talk, she'd let him. And then she'd make sure he never came back into her life again. Lena hesitated for only a second before yanking the door open. Mark stood there, the dim hallway light casting shadows across his sharp features. He looked exhausted, hollow, even. But that didn't matter. Not anymore. She crossed her arms. You have 2 minutes. His jaw clenched, but he nodded, stepping inside. The scent of his cologne, faint but familiar, wrapped around her, bringing back memories she had buried deep. She took a step back, creating distance between them. Mark raked a hand through his hair. I know you don't want to hear me out, but I had no choice. There's always a choice, Lena snapped. And you chose to leave me standing at the altar. His eyes darkened. You think I wanted that? I don't know, Mark. Because you never told me anything. She folded her arms tighter around herself, as if that would keep her from unraveling. You didn't even have the decency to break up with me first. You just disappeared. Mark exhaled slowly. I left to protect you. Lena let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Oh, right. You said that earlier. Protect me from what, exactly? He hesitated. Lena's heart twisted painfully.
See?
You still won't tell me the truth. I can't. Then we have nothing to talk about. She turned toward the door, holding it open. Goodbye, Mark. He didn't move. Instead, his voice dropped lower, rougher. If I tell you, Lena, everything changes. Her grip on the door tightened. Everything already changed. Mark took a step closer, his eyes locked onto hers. I had to leave because staying would have put you in danger. She wanted to laugh at the sheer absurdity of it, but something in his expression stopped her. He looked serious, desperate even. But she had spent 6 months picking up the pieces of her broken heart. She wasn't about to let him shatter her all over again. I don't care, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I don't care why you left. All I care about is that you did. And that's not something I can ever forgive. Mark flinched. Lena. I'm done, Mark. Her voice wavered, but she forced herself to stay strong.
Please.
Just go. For a moment, she thought he'd fight, that he'd refuse to leave until she heard him out. But then he nodded, his expression unreadable. Okay. Lena didn't watch him leave. She couldn't. Instead, she shut the door behind him and leaned against it, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. It was over. It had to be. Then why did it feel like her heart was breaking all over again? Mark walked out of Lena's apartment building, his fists clenched. The cold night air did nothing to cool the fire burning inside him. She had every right to hate him. He knew that. But walking away from her again felt like ripping out his own heart. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't want to answer. But he didn't have a choice. Sighing, he pulled it out and pressed it to his ear. Yeah. A deep voice responded. You saw her? Mark's jaw tightened. Yes. And she hates me. A pause. Then, good.
Keep it that way.
Mark's grip on the phone tightened. That's not your call. It is if you want her safe. Mark stared at the city lights ahead of him, his chest tightening. She was never supposed to get dragged into this. She wouldn't have if you hadn't fallen in love with her. Silence stretched between them. Finally, the voice on the other end spoke again, colder this time. Stay away from her, Mark. Or she won't survive what's coming. The line went dead. Mark exhaled slowly, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He had left Lena once to protect her. But this time, he wasn't sure he could do it again. Lena didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Mark had said. I had to leave because staying would have put you in danger.
It was a lie.
It had to be. Because the alternative, that there was actually something dangerous enough to make Mark leave her, wasn't something she wanted to consider. By morning, she was exhausted but determined. It didn't matter why he left. It didn't change the fact that he had. She got up, showered, and dressed, pushing Mark out of her thoughts. But the moment she stepped outside her apartment, she felt it. A presence. Like she was being watched. Lena's heart pounded as she glanced around. The streets were normal, cars passing, people walking, but something felt off. Maybe it was just her nerves. Seeing Mark again had shaken her, and now her mind was playing tricks on her. Still, she quickened her pace. She had barely made it 2 blocks when someone grabbed her wrist. Lena yelped and spun around, only to see Mia, her sister, staring at her with wide eyes.
Whoa.
"It's just me," Mia said, releasing her immediately. "What's with you?" Lena exhaled sharply. "Nothing." Mia raised an eyebrow. "Nothing? You look like you've seen a ghost." Lena forced a smile. "Maybe I have." Mia's expression darkened. "Mark." Lena didn't answer, but she didn't have to. Mia sighed. "Tell me you told him to rot in hell." "I told him to leave me alone." Mia nodded approvingly. "Good. Now, let's make sure he listens." Lena hesitated. I don't think he's going to." Mia groaned. "Of course not. Because Mark always thinks he knows best. That man could disappear for 10 years and still come back acting like he has a say in your life." Lena swallowed hard. "Mia, what if something really did happen?" Mia froze. "Don't. I'm serious." Her sister's expression softened. "Lena, don't do this to yourself.
He hurt you.
Whatever excuse he has now, it doesn't matter." Lena wanted to believe that. But why did it feel like she was missing something? Mark sat in his car, parked a few blocks from Lena's apartment, watching. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to get close. But after last night, he had a bad feeling. And Mark had learned the hard way. His instincts were never wrong. His phone buzzed. Another call. He ignored it. Then he saw her. Lena walking down the street, her long hair catching in the morning breeze. She looked the same, but different. Stronger. Colder. And then she stopped. She glanced around, her body tensing. Mark's grip on the steering wheel tightened. She feels it. Someone was watching her. And it wasn't just him. Mark shoved open the car door. He wasn't going to let this happen. Not again. But before he could move, a voice spoke from behind him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Mark turned sharply, his hand already reaching for the gun he kept at his waist. A man leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes sharp with amusement. "Relax. I'm not here to fight." Mark's jaw clenched. "Then what the hell do you want?" The man smirked. "Just a friendly warning. You shouldn't have come back." Mark stared him down. "Who sent you?" The man chuckled. "Does it matter? You already know how this ends." Mark's blood turned to ice. The man straightened and turned to leave. "Enjoy your reunion while it lasts, Mark. Because soon, she won't even remember you." Then he disappeared into the crowd. Mark's heart pounded. This wasn't over. And if he didn't do something fast, Lena was going to get caught in the crossfire. Again. Lena couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep in her chest. Even after parting ways with Mia, the sensation of being watched hadn't disappeared. She kept glancing over her shoulder, but every time, she saw nothing unusual, just strangers going about their day. Maybe she was paranoid. Maybe Mark had just gotten to her. She sighed, stepping into the bookstore she owned, a small but cozy space she had poured her heart into after Mark left. The scent of old pages and fresh coffee grounded her, bringing a sense of normalcy. "Hey, boss." Lena looked up to see Sophie, her assistant, stacking a pile of books behind the counter. "Hey," Lena greeted, forcing a smile. Sophie frowned. "You okay? You look tense."
Lena hesitated.
"It's nothing. Just didn't sleep well." Sophie didn't look convinced, but she let it go. "You got a delivery earlier. Some guy dropped it off." Lena furrowed her brows. "What guy?" Sophie shrugged. "Didn't say. Just left this." She reached under the counter and pulled out a small, unmarked envelope. Lena's pulse quickened. Sophie must have noticed her hesitation. "Is it something bad?" "I don't know." Lena took the envelope with slightly unsteady fingers and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, For words. Stay away from Mark. Lena's breath caught. She looked up sharply. Did you see his face? Sophie shook her head.
No.
But he seemed off. Like, I don't know. He wasn't just some delivery guy. Lena's hands curled into fists. First Mark's sudden reappearance. Now this? What the hell was going on? Mark was pacing when Lena stormed into his apartment. The moment he saw her, he froze. Lena. She slammed the envelope onto his chest. Care to explain this? Mark glanced down, his expression darkening. Slowly, he opened the note, his eyes scanning the message. His jaw tightened. Where did you get this? Lena folded her arms. At my bookstore. Someone dropped it off. Want to tell me why random people are warning me about you? Mark exhaled, rubbing his forehead. Lena, you need to trust me. She let out a sharp laugh. Trust you? Are you serious? She shook her head. You lied to me. You left me humiliated in front of everyone I loved. You show up out of nowhere, tell me you left to protect me but won't say from what, and now I'm getting threatening notes. Mark took a step forward, voice firm. I never wanted you involved in this. Well, congratulations, Mark. Because I am involved. She glared at him. Now tell me the truth. What the hell is going on? Mark hesitated. That was all Lena needed. She scoffed. Unbelievable. Turning on her heel, she made for the door. But before she could reach it, Mark grabbed her wrist. Gently, but firmly. Lena, please. The plea in his voice made her pause. Slowly, she turned back to him. His face was lined with exhaustion, with something that looked a lot like pain. And for the first time, she saw it.
Fear.
Real, raw fear. Her stomach twisted. Mark, what did you do? His grip on her tightened for just a second. Then, finally, he exhaled. And when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I got involved with the wrong people. Mark let go of Lena's wrist and ran a hand through his hair. He looked like he was debating whether to tell her more. Lena's patience snapped. Mark, I swear to God, if you don't start making sense. He cut her off, voice sharp. I was working for someone dangerous. And when I tried to leave, they didn't take it well. Lena's stomach dropped. You were working for them? Mark nodded. At first, I didn't realize what I was getting into. By the time I did, it was too late. And when I tried to walk away, they threatened you. Lena's breath caught. Mark continued, his voice rough. The night before our wedding, they gave me a choice. Either I disappeared, or they made sure you did. The room spun for a second. Lena had imagined 100 reasons why Mark had left. But never this.
She shook her head. No.
No, if that were true, you should have told me. We could have figured something out together. Mark laughed bitterly. You think they would have let that happen? You think I could risk your life like that? Lena opened her mouth, then closed it. Because deep down, she knew Mark. And as much as she wanted to hate him, she knew, if he believed leaving was the only way to save her, he would have done it. Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. Are they still after you? Mark's silence was answer enough. Lena's heart pounded. So, what now? Mark met her gaze, something dark and unyielding settling in his expression.
Now.
His voice was quiet, but firm. Now, I make sure they never touch you again. Lena stepped back, shaking her head.
No.
No way. You don't get to make decisions for me anymore, Mark. His jaw clenched. Lena, listen to me. I am listening, she snapped. And all I hear is you trying to drag me into something I didn't ask for. You left me to protect me?
Fine.
But you don't get to come back 6 months later and expect me to just accept this. Mark exhaled sharply, his frustration evident. You don't understand. They don't forget, Lena. I can't just walk away and hope they let you go. Then why come back at all? She demanded. If you really wanted to protect me, why not stay gone? Mark hesitated. Lena narrowed her eyes. You couldn't stay away, could you? His fingers curled into fists. No, he admitted. I couldn't. A bitter laugh escaped her. Of course. Because you get to decide when to walk away and when to come back. Mark stepped forward. I never wanted to leave you. But you did, she whispered. His face twisted with something like regret. I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. Lena stared at him. And now? Mark's gaze darkened. Now I know that walking away didn't fix anything. He took another step forward, his voice softer. Lena, I don't expect you to forgive me.
But you have to trust me on this.
You're not safe. She held her ground, her heart pounding. She wanted to tell him to leave.
To stay out of her life.
But that note, stay away from Mark. Whoever had sent it knew where to find her. A chill ran down her spine. She swallowed hard. I don't want to be a part of this. Mark's expression turned grim. You already are. Lena locked up the bookstore late that night, her mind racing. She wanted to believe this wasn't her problem, that she could ignore Mark and go back to her life. But the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. She glanced over her shoulder before heading toward her car. And that's when she saw him, a man, standing beneath a street lamp, watching her. Her stomach clenched. She quickened her pace, reaching for her keys. Then he moved. Not toward her, but away. Like he was letting her know he could have followed if he wanted to. Lena's hands trembled as she got into her car and locked the doors. This wasn't just about Mark anymore. Whoever these people were, they weren't just watching him. They were watching her. And that terrified her more than anything. Lena banged on Mark's door, her pulse racing. It swung open almost instantly. He was wide awake, like he'd been expecting this. Lena? She pushed past him, gripping the envelope in her hands. You were right. Mark shut the door, his body tensing. What happened? She turned to face him, her voice unsteady. They're watching me, aren't they? Mark's face hardened. Lena exhaled shakily. I saw someone. He didn't do anything, but he wanted me to know he was there. Mark swore under his breath. She swallowed. So, what do we do now? Mark met her gaze, his voice firm. We stop running. Lena sat across from Mark in his dimly lit apartment, the weight of their situation pressing down on her like an iron cage. For months, she had been trying to move forward, to build a life beyond the shadow of heartbreak he had left behind. But now, she was right back where she started, trapped in Mark's world, whether she wanted to be or not. She let out a shaky breath. How bad is it? Mark hesitated, then leaned forward. Bad enough that I can't fight them alone. She stared at him. Then why did you come back? Mark's jaw tightened. Because I couldn't leave you in the dark. I thought disappearing would keep you safe, but they never stopped watching. And the second they knew I was back, they set their sights on you, too. Lena swallowed hard. She had been naive to think she could just ignore this. You should have told me sooner, she whispered.
Mark looked down.
I know. A heavy silence fell between them. Then, Lena squared her shoulders. So, what's the plan? Mark's eyes snapped to hers, surprise flickering across his face. You're staying? She let out a humorless laugh. What choice do I have? Mark exhaled. I'll handle it. Lena arched a brow. That's not how this works. You don't get to disappear again, handle things in secret, and leave me wondering if I'll wake up with a bullet in my chest. If I'm in danger, I deserve to know what's going on. Mark studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, he said. No more secrets. Lena released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Whatever was coming, she wouldn't face it blind. And for the first time since he had returned, she felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. And maybe, just maybe, the start of something new. 6 months later, Lena stood at the edge of the pier, the waves crashing against the wooden beams below. The battle was over. Mark had kept his promise. He had faced the ghosts of his past, and together, they had torn down the walls of the nightmare that had haunted them. The people who had threatened them were gone. And yet, as Lena stood there, staring at the horizon, she knew the scars they left behind would never fully fade. She felt a presence beside her before he even spoke. You're quiet, Mark murmured. Lena glanced up at him. Just thinking.
His gaze softened.
Regrets? She shook her head.
No.
Mark exhaled, reaching for her hand hesitantly, as if afraid she might pull away. She didn't. Instead, she squeezed his fingers. They had been broken once, but somehow they had found their way back. And this time, they weren't letting go.